Hello and welcome to our today's Coffee and Consulting. My name is Friederike Ruch. I'm the CEO of Convenus, and I have the honor today to guide you through the next 30 minutes and discuss and talk about the topic Swiss precision, navigating assembly and project assignments in the industry. That's our today's topic. We have chosen the topic because we have lots of clients and questions coming from different people about that topic, and I think there are certain things which are a bit unclear, as well as that we thought it might be good to also get the information and get an update on the different topics around that assignments, assembly and project assignments as such in the focus, but whatever we discuss now in the next 30 minutes is also relevant to any other type of assignments in basically in this similar way. Then, because the topic is quite, or we have lots of slides prepared, we will start as well. Two things maybe from in the beginning. One is during the presentation you can download the slides. If you want to do that, then please do so. The other thing is you're all put on unmute. So in case you have any questions and you would like to get some clarifications, there's a possibility on the right-hand side you find a box where you can indicate all your questions. Just put them in and we happily will answer them, not during that presentation, but later on by email. Before we start and dive into the topic, I thought it might be good to just get the topic and the areas where we are, or the areas we discussed today, to get it from two samples so that we are all on the same page. The first example, which you can see on the left-hand side, is Peter Müller, who is employed at a Swiss company. He is now going abroad with his colleagues for 3 weeks to assemble a machine in Poland. He still is employed by Maschinen AG. There is no difference. He will get paid. There are no changes at all. He's just going for 3 weeks to do something abroad. It can also be the same way, because today we look more on the Swiss side. This is now going abroad, but it would be the same way going to Switzerland. We have to look at, and we go that in details in a second, about the different legal topics. We have to look at that as well. When we later on, starting from more or less the next slide on, we will look at the cases, the other way around. So people employed abroad and going to Switzerland to, for example, assemble a machine, or if we look at the second example, which is a project assignment, the lady, Lisa Meyer, is a management consulting and is carrying out rendering services in her regard to a bank. Now here it is Germany for a 6 months period. So both of them have some of these similar things we have to look at. One topic which we will not discuss today, we just maybe raise it once or twice, is when you have people going abroad or coming to Switzerland for assembling a machine, then sometimes the topic of the assemblance of the machine is included in the contract when the firm is selling the machine. And that has an influence in the end as well on whether someone might be exempted from the from the requirement of an real work permit for the assemblance. But that is just a few cases, and you would have to look into that in a bit more detail and then really case by case. The other thing which we will not look at today, all the different areas from a company perspective you might have to look at on top of it when you sell a machine, like the customs and everything. And that is also if you have an employee going abroad to assemble a machine, then maybe he has also to take with him some tools and stuff like this. And there are certain VAT customs requirements to take care of, which we don't touch today as a topic. When we look at those type of assignments, then there are basically certain aspects, and they are the aspects as such are always the same. Like we always have to look at immigration and entry formalities, also visa requirements. We have to look at the tax component, as well as if we talk about assembling something or going abroad for assembling, or also on a maintenance basis. Then sometimes you have to take with you some tools. So customs is then definitely a topic. Social security, labor law and minimum salary requirement. If we send somebody to another country, then we have to see what kind of legal requirements are in place in the country of destination. And then we have to consider that for the period the employee is working in that country. Internally, we have to look at the payroll process and expense reimbursement process. Both is quite relevant in the end, so that the employee gets the salary he has earned, as well as the expenses reimbursed. Now, someone could think it's just easy, it's like the normal payroll, but usually not, because there are a couple of more expenses you have, and then you always have to look at whether that expense, the reimbursement of the expense, is actually a taxable item, or also subject to Social Security. So you have to look at those factors always on top of it. And then again, from an internal perspective, you have to look at the compliance and all the processes like tracking, policies, guidelines, which have to be considered. Some companies have for each type of each different type of assignment a policy. Some have just for short-term and long-term assignment a policy. So you have to look at which one is actually applicable for that. Where in most cases some confusion is with those short-term assignments, because you usually have the business trip policy in place, and then you would look at if someone goes for 3 weeks, like in the first example we had, the slide before. If someone goes for 3 weeks to work abroad on assembling the machine, then you would have to look at whether now the business trip policy will be the one you have to look up, whether someone gets certain expenses reimbursed, or whatever the process and procedure is, or you would have to look whether the short-term policy, if there is one in your firm, whether that is the one you have to deal with. And therefore it's but that is a different topic, to make sure that the policies have the rule, or have the provision in the policy which says that that one is just really applicable for short-term assignments, and that one is for business trips. So to make sure that everybody knows exactly which one to choose. We just looked at the different topics we have to look at when we are dealing with sampling assignments or project assignments. Now, the triggers or the factors which are most important to make sure we are compliant and we know exactly what we need to do is that we need to know the nationality of the employee, which is a factor in regard to immigration and social security. For that, it is very important to know what the employee's nationality, the country of residence, is important in order to define which social security treaty we have to look at, as well as what kind of double tax treaty, if there is one. So from a tax and social security perspective, that's quite important, as well as it might be also from an immigration perspective an important factor in regard to whether someone needs maybe a Schengen visa on top or not. The country in which the employer is situated is important from an immigration perspective, usually, as well as in some cases also from a social security perspective. And the country of destination is definitely the most important factor, or the first factor at least, so that we know which country we have to deal with and what kind of legislation. Therefore, the rules always are determined by the country the employee has to go to. Rules like immigration, that is the country who will tell us whether there is a work permit required or not. Social security wise, it is what kind of treaty we have to look at, if there is any treaty, what is in regard to social security liability to be looked at, as well as the factor about the international health insurance. And we will also then see that the longer an assignment will take, the more important and also things like international health insurance coverage might be. From a tax point of view, the country of residence as well as the country of destination are the two countries we have to look at, because those are determining what kind of double tax treaty we need to look at or can use in the end. The assignment period is important because then we will see whether the 183 days rule, which I'm sure you all are aware of, is something we can consider, or we just have to actually go straight away to see if if the assignment is beyond 6 months, that the employee will in any case become subject to taxation in the country he is going to. And then it's just a question whether it's a limited tax liability or an unlimited one. So that is quite important from that perspective. Factual and economic employer. In Switzerland, we know the factual employer, which is a principle we not just have invented. If I may use the word invention, it's something we just kind of copied, but did not just copy paste from the other countries. We just changed it a little bit so that it doesn't look quite the same. But the principle behind is just the same thing, that it's undermining the 183 days rule and saying basically independent how long the employee is in the country, in case the employer he is with the company he is working for in that country can be viewed as the economic employer, so he is benefiting from it, or the factual employer because the person he has to report to sits in that country. He is kind of integrated in it. So then we have that topic. Usually, the topic about factual employer, economic employer is only if there are assignments between two companies which belong to the same firm. If it's the assignment from one company to a client, then we don't have to look at that aspect because the client usually is not viewed as the economic employer or factual employer. Tax equalization process, as soon as someone has to pay taxes in the other country, usually as a company, you then have a process for that in place so that the employee is not suffering any kind of tax consequences, but also on the other end, not really benefiting from it. So you would like to avoid both so that in the end, because that is still the same principle and it doesn't matter how you call the assignment, for all the same, that you say the employee should not be better off, but also not worse off while he is abroad working for you. If we now if we go to Switzerland and we now check from a Swiss perspective how the different topics are. We start with the immigration part. So basically for people on an assembly assignment or project assignment, we have different types of permits we usually use. And here you see that it's important to know, because that's the first distinguishing about those two things, where the employer is situated. So if the employer is situated in an EU EFTA member state, like for example Germany, and I send now someone to Switzerland for assembling a machine, then I can look at the exceptional rule and say, okay, for the first 8 days someone is coming to Switzerland, I don't need to have a work permit in place. So then that would be fine. But the thing is that it is not just for that assignment now the 8-day rule will be viewed, it will be for the whole firm, for the whole calendar year, independent on to which city, canton, for which needs or requests the individuals have been sent to Switzerland. So if, for example, the DA the International AG in Germany will send in January someone already for 8 days, and now our assembling assignment will take place in July, then the 8 days have been used already for someone else, so we can't use it for that individual. So we only have the option to go for the notification process or the 120 days work permit. Both is something we usually use for assembling assignments because they are usually maximum 4 months. For project assignments, we are usually rather for 120 days work permit or L&B permits, but that also depends in the end on how long the individual has to be in Switzerland. You see, if the employer now is situated in a non-EU EFTA member state, the notification process we can't use. However, the exceptional rule is a bit, I would say, or from a practical point of view, a bit better, because the 8 days are now not any longer just counted by by employer as well as employee. It's just based on the number of days an employee has spent in Switzerland. So if an employee had been in January already for 3 days in Switzerland working, he can come again in July for another 5 before we have to look at the work permit. In this regard now, the nationality is actually taking the second seat and is not the first trigger to see which way we need to go. Up to the 120 days work permit, there is no need for taking up residency. Therefore, it's a quite easy process and way to go. Anything beyond those 4 months or 120 days is then that someone has also to take up residence in Switzerland. And then also with that, a lot of administrative tasks are triggered. Based on that, you usually will try to find a solution to go with the 120 days work permit in order just to avoid all the different angles beyond the just getting the work permit. The Posted Workers Act, which lies behind it and gives us now the couple of, or an idea about what the provisions are from a labor law perspective. And basically, they look really at the salary level. So nobody should earn less than someone in the country. In Switzerland, that is taken quite strictly. If we look at the other countries, then it depends a bit where we go. However, if as the Swiss salary level is quite high, usually that's not an issue going to one of the other EU member states that our salary level is too low. So it's rather the opposite way, that for companies sending people from abroad to Switzerland, we have an issue with, not an issue as such, but it is a matter because the salary usually is too low and therefore companies or employers have to pay something in addition. Working hours, rest periods, that is also something which is taken quite strictly. And if you get a labor market control, that's basically also the first thing they actually look at. What usually gets a bit forgotten is the night and Sunday work. So if we talk about project assignments or assembly assignments, also attached to that are all those maintenance assignments. There is a possibility or a higher risk usually to have someone has also to work during the night, meaning between 23 p.m. And 5 in the morning or 6 in the morning, and then you usually need a separate permission, as well as working on a Sunday. And even in a couple of cantons, you have to have a special approval for working on a Saturday. So that's the things you have to look at in addition, and that is not covered with getting a work permit as such. Because those additional approvals you also will have to request for people living and residing in Switzerland. The Schengen visa requirement has now not strictly to do something with Switzerland. However, we see that people forget that they think as soon as they have a permit for Switzerland, then they are okay, like with the 120 days permit. But the thing is that depending whether you need now a Schengen visa on top, a good example is usually people coming from the UK, because the UK is not any longer a member state of the EU. Based on that, and is not a Schengen member state, based on that, they are actually in the need to get a Schengen visa, or have to consider the not getting a Schengen visa, but have to consider the Schengen rules. And the Schengen rules are you can only stay 90 days in any 180 days period in the Schengen area. And now, if you have a permit to come to Switzerland for up to 120 days in a 12-month period, then, and you maybe want to spend some holiday in France for the summer for the 5 weeks, so that those days will be considered or have to be considered for the Schengen regulation. Whereas for the Swiss 120 days permit, you don't have to consider them. But it's kind of, you have to look at both rules. You can't just look at one of those rules. Social security wise, we divide our world in two areas: the non-treaty countries as well as the treaty countries. And from a social security perspective, I would say it's an easy approach, because you have to look basically is the EU-EFTA agreement. Now looking from a Swiss perspective, because we don't belong to the EU, is that one applicable? Then we just have to get the A1. If we have a bilateral agreement between the other country and Switzerland, then the certificate of coverage would be sufficient. If there is no agreement at all, so the opposite part, then basically the individual might be subject to Swiss Social Security if they are working here in Switzerland. This has always to be checked then with the relevant Social Security authorities. We had lots of cases where they said up to 30 days they do not really care, because it's also viewing the administration behind, and those people are usually covered in the country where they are coming from. So therefore, the Swiss Social Security Authority have a kind of a way to say up to 30 days we don't do anything. If it's going beyond, then definitely Swiss Social Security would have to be paid, and then in kind of full. Keep in mind, and that is really quite important, that the A1 or the certificate of coverage is really required from the first day. And if you have a labor market control of the individual in Switzerland, then that is basically one of the first things the inspector will look at. From a tax point of view, we are also, I think lots of the cases can be dealt in the area we are today looking, assembly assignments or project assignments, as long as they are up to 6 months, so up to those 183 days, there is then no taxation in Switzerland if the employee is, for example, like here in the example, coming from Germany and going to Switzerland. It's also the other way around, and then there would be no taxation in the country of destination. Anything beyond 183 days, honestly, if you have a longer assignment, then companies have also a bit bigger and more detailed policy, and also you usually take care a bit on a different way of those people. That starts with how you calculate compensation and the tax and social security issue. Also, sometimes then family can be come accompanying the employee, things like that. Therefore, that is a bit different. But if we are in the group for up to 183 days, then those three components or conditions have to be met. So the individual cannot be more in Switzerland than 183 days in a calendar year. And Switzerland usually takes the calendar year for that, to assess whether someone is subject to taxation in Switzerland. No compensation can be paid in Switzerland, as well as no cost covered from a permanent establishment or affiliated company in Switzerland. As we talk today about assembly assignments and project assignments, which usually go to a client and not to an affiliated firm or affiliated legal entity, then we can leave out the last part about the factual employer principle. But that is something you have to consider and look at quite well if your assignment goes within the same firm. And to end our today's coffee and consultings, there are a couple of red flags I just have raised already in the last couple of slides, but still would like to point out. If you have assignments for assembling a machine, for example, or assembling something, as well as foreign project assignments, make sure you know the immigration rule of the country the employee is going to. If it's Switzerland, then definitely. I think there are only a very, very few exceptions when you don't need a work permit or a notification process. So make sure that either you have definitely looked at and you know exactly what you need. Look at the Swiss equivalent salary, because that is also something where the where Swiss authorities are looking quite carefully. Saturday and Sunday permit we've talked about. And I point that out and put that as a red flag because labor market inspections are increasing. And it's not any longer that they just go on a construction site. They are going to any kind of multinational firm as well. And it's also for project assignments, management consultings going from A to B would also fall under that category and are inspected more and more. So make sure you have that really in line. In regard to taxes, as said, the factual employer principle might be not your first concern. Look at the 183 days rule, whether you can use that, because that's quite helpful in order to make sure that your administration is not going completely kind of massive. Because it's not just about paying the taxes in the other country, it's then about how you calculate the difference and what do you do with the difference. And the difference might be then also subject to social security, and you have to cross it up accordingly. And that's then getting to a kind of nightmare for the payroll, and they don't really like to do that. Above all, in case you see it could have been avoided. The 183 days, and that is quite important to be aware of, is it's not just the working days in the country which will be considered, it will be all the days someone is staying in the same country. So if you have someone coming here for a project of 6 months, so you say, okay, good, fine, we are under those 183 days, we are good, there will be no tax consequence. Now, if the employee in the end thought, oh, it was so nice, I would actually like to go and travel again during the year with my family to the country, and stays then for 2 or 3 weeks in Switzerland, for example, then based on that, if it's in the same calendar year, that will trigger in the end that he will be retroactively be subject to taxation. Keep in mind, the authority might not come at the time point the employee has left the country. They might come back to you also 5 years later. So there is a certain time period then when they still can come back. There might be also the possibility that they don't figure that out and they don't see it and will not come at all, but don't count on it. And also keep in mind that the exchange of information is actually increasing, and with all the topics we have, with all the different digitalization projects there are, the possibilities the authority have to get the information about who is in Switzerland or who is in whatever other country, they are the same things you have to look at, is actually increasing. And that is something where I think there is not much leeway in the end for something like this. Last point as well, which is just an administrative thing, keep in mind to get the A1 or the COC. Even you can prove that the employee might not be subject to the social security in the country he is going to, but the authority are looking at that is kind of the confirmation, and they want that document. If they don't see it, if there is a labor market um, control, they might just tell the employee that the employee has to stop to work, which has happened a couple of times in Switzerland, and I'm sure it will also happen in other countries as well. That's basically for today for our today's event. If you have any questions, then still send us an email or give us a call, and we're happy to answer all your questions. Then I'd just like to share in the next 1 minute a couple of things you can expect from us or you can see from us, and we would be happy to meet you there again. One is our Swiss Global Mobility Conference, which is next year in March, and we will start really marketing it in the next few months as the speakers are more and more ready already. The our newsletter, in case you haven't received it yet or you don't receive it yet, please subscribe to it. I think it has always quite some good inputs, or might have some quite good inputs also for you. Some you think for the moment it's not really interested, but maybe later. We write that together with our partners, and I think we are quite proud of the partners who actually are in line with that. And then as well, as maybe a tool for getting information for you, is our weekly alert, which I think has some good information and might also be quite helpful for you for your daily work. With this, I actually close the our event for today, and I wish you a nice week and hopefully to meet you at one of our next events again. Thank you for your attention.